Metro on 1019 WDET-FM. I am Tia Graham, and this week, the Metro's guest co-host is WDET's news director, Jerome Vaughn. Welcome, Jerome.
Good to be with you, Tia. Today on the show, former President Donald Trump was in Detroit yesterday. We'll talk with a couple of reporters who covered his visit about how his campaign is going.
Plus, it's Black Philanthropy Month, and we'll chat with a member of the organization handing out the grants and a recipient of the microgrant as well. But first up on the Metro, restoration is a difficult task, but it can bring a sense of healing. Recently, people in Detroit's Virginia Park neighborhood have been partaking in that kind of work. Community members in the area north of the Henry Ford Hospital and the Motown Museum erected a placard earlier this year to note the historical tragedy that occurred at the old Algiers Motel. It was there that white police officers murdered 3 black teens during the 1967 rebellion. More recently, Virginia Park Street received over $5 million to reconstruct its brick-paved street, a space that was torn apart by tanks that rode through the area during the rebellion. To discuss the project now and the process for making the change, we have one member of the Virginia Park Block Club with us. Jody Wise is the vice president of the club. Jody, welcome to the Metro.
Welcome. Thank you, and welcome. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Of course. Once again, welcome for being here. And yeah, we love the fact that you took time out of your day, especially this hot day, to come down to the studio. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But Jody, if you can, just give us a brief history of Virginia Park Street. The 131-year-old brick street was distinctly scarred by military tanks during the 1967 uprising. How was the community changed by that moment in time?
That our community has gone through a plethora of changes. I mean, from fraternity houses to group homes. It's changed many times throughout the decades. We have one resident that's lived there for over 50 years, and he's seeing constant change there. We are now down to one fraternity house, and we have one group home. And most of the homes there are some rentals, but most of the homes are becoming single-family homes again, which is what GM tried to do in the 80s when they tried to renovate the News Center area. So GM they're the ones that had us designated an historic district. They had all parts of News Center in different areas go to the national, so we're nationally recognized as a historic. And because Virginia Park's national recognition goes from the alleyway behind the south side and the alleyway to the north side, the entire street is considered historic also.
Wow, which is really, really significant to point out that it's not just one space or one location, it's the entire street there.
Correct.
So how long has the Virginia Block Club been trying to fix the street?
I can only speak from the time that I moved in. So I moved in 2016, and in 2018, we sent out a letter to the community asking people to volunteer for a task force. My background is in advocacy, and so I just felt if we could lobby all the different organizations and get our name out there, it would help for us to maybe get the street repaired and restored. It's been a long haul. As a matter of fact, I was having state reps come out in 2020, and I had actually emailed and texted with Isaac Robinson about coming to our street, and then he died. It was I was so sorry. I mean, he was so proactive. He didn't have anybody call me. He contacted me directly, and I think at that moment, we realized the seriousness of what was happening with COVID, and we just shut down. We just stopped. I mean, the street's not that important when people are losing their lives. But we started back again in 2021, and we've got some great allies. Sue Mosey was one of them. Without her, we wouldn't be here. We have great allies in the city. Julie Josniak at DTE Energy, not DTE Energy. She's the one that made sure we got the bricks from Buffet that we could move to our street. Pam Lemmy from the city, she also notified us that those bricks, she works in DPW, that we might be interested in those bricks. So we've had sources throughout the city that have cared about us restoring this and trying to help in any way they can.
Yeah. So Isaac Robinson was a state representative out of the city of Detroit that you were referring to. But how big of a deal is this? How will it change the lives of folks living in Virginia Park, especially working on this since 2020 and then stopping and starting back up in 2021? What would it mean to the community?
Oh, so the second block, have you driven it?
No.
The second block.
I kind of avoid the ones when I see.
I know. The second block, they are 7-inch deep ruts from the foundation breaking down. It's starting to happen on the first block. The last street to go in, the last block, was the third block. Theirs doesn't seem quite as, as deep, or the ruts aren't as deep, but it didn't go in until 1910. So ours are, it's just been crazy. So I want to put a shout out to all of the people that live on the second block of Virginia Park, because they don't complain. They don't. There's not been a soul on this street that doesn't want to restore it. They want this restored. There's nobody that's ever come up to me and said, Jody, why? Let's just brick, asphalt over it. They're proud of the street. We're all proud of the street. So, and it's a history of the city. We believe we're caretakers of it. I mean, the street's been there 131 years, and many, many people have traveled that road.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing to me when I think about it. And then to think that the tanks went down there in 67 is just, and to see what they did to the bricks. Hopefully we don't know what will happen, but we had a resident suggest that maybe, the Detroit Historical Museum or African American Museum might be interested in taking some of those bricks and doing some sort of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but installation.
Yeah.
And talking about them. Because
that would be really cool.
I don't want to see them go. I'd like to see those bricks somehow be incorporated.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Even possibly finding a space for them at Michigan Central. Just any,
any somewhere,
that can be shown to the public.
Yes,
if you're just tuning in or just joining us on the Metro, we're speaking with a member of the Virginia Park Block Club. We're discussing the money that's going to renovate Virginia Park Street right now. So we talked a little bit about what it took to get it going. You had so many conversations with state representatives and different block clubs and other organizations around you to get this going. The Virginia Park Street was also the site of the tragedy of the Algiers Motel, like we just referred, where the white police officers murdered 3 black teens during the 67 rebellion. Here's a clip of Dr. Danielle McGuire speaking with us on the Metro about what it meant to put this placard up.
In creating a new narrative about that space, restoring presence to that space, it gives us the opportunity to tell the truth about the past and to heal from that trauma, to provide some kind of repair, both for the victims and their descendants, but also for all of us.
And since working in the community, living in the community since 2016, being a part of the community, immersing yourself there, does putting this memorial up feel like a form of healing to those you've spoken to in the community as well for yourself? Does it feel like it's a healing moment?
Oh, I definitely agree. I think so. I mean, they're just... So many neighbors were happy to have it finally go up. It took 8 years for that process. And the fact that the professor kept with it is amazing. And we owe a deep gratitude for her. Everybody's happy. It's in a location where it's close to Woodward, where you can see it. If you're walking by, you'll stop, you'll read, but you have to come around to the other side and read it too. It's different. So yeah, it feels terrific to have it there.
Yeah, just like you were saying, 131 years for the road. What about the community itself? If those bricks could talk.
Right. I agree. Can you imagine what you would learn? I agree with you totally.
Wow. Yeah. There were people on the block who didn't want to put up a memorial of the event. Talk about their perspective. Why do you believe that this was something that, didn't want to go up, that people didn't want to see up?
The fear, I think, was mostly that we'd increase traffic into the community. That was the only reason. Sometime a while ago before I was there, people partied in that park. They, spent time in that park disturbing the residents. Yeah. And so there was that fear that that's what would happen again. We haven't seen anything like that. Change is hard for people. Especially when you get it the way you want things to be, it's hard. I understand that fear. I do. But it's been good. We haven't that hasn't happened. People do stop. I do see people go in there and read it. I do see them as they walk across the street and start, and come back in. But the fear was that, just boatloads of people would be coming by to see it. And that's not been the case. But you're welcome to.
Yeah, exactly. I think about the other placards that you just kind of stumble upon as you're traveling throughout the city of Detroit, especially Black Bottom. When you see that plaque, you just stop and you read. Well, you want to be in that community and want to know more. So when we think about the process for lobbying for change or asking for change or fighting for change in the city, for those who want to be more active, what advice would you give them?
Oh, well, just first of all, you have to be patient. You can't do this if you're not going to be patient. And it takes time to build relationships, takes time to get to know people. It's just, for me, I've always understood that it was going to take time. Then it's getting the right allies and making sure that you can talk to the right people, and they can guide you towards the right people. And that's been very, very helpful for us.
Yes.
And that's what I would suggest. Relationship building is probably the most important thing if you're doing civic work, in my opinion, but that's me.
That's the one thing we've heard and we hear from continuously from the different community groups, nonprofits, just having that community working together. I mean, a lot of people in these groups are doing the same work. So just to come together and put all the forces together, it's really, really great to see. Before I let you go, renovation to the street is supposed to begin in the spring of 2025. When should it be completed?
They said don't plan on it being completed very quickly. They have to work with the historic district on the commission on this, and so it's going to take some time. And they said at least to the end of the end of summer, at least, maybe longer. So it's going to take some time.
But it's going to get done. Jody Wise is a leader of the Virginia Park Block Club. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro and letting us know what's going on in the community.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me, Tia and Jerome. I appreciate it.
Of course. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham here with WDET's news director, Jerome Vaughn. Today it's going to be 92 degrees and there's a heat advisory in effect until 10 p.m. Wednesday, 85 degrees, another chance of thunderstorms. Thursday, partly sunny with a high of 81, and Friday, 88 degrees with another chance of rain.
In the news, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services found a dead falcon near 7 Mile on the Southfield Freeway that tested positive for West Nile virus. Currently, no West Nile virus cases have been reported or confirmed in humans in Detroit or Wayne County. Residents are encouraged to wear long sleeves, pants, and use insect repellent when they're outside. People should also make sure their windows and door screens are keeping mosquitoes out. Anyone who believes they may have contracted West Nile virus are encouraged to contact their healthcare provider immediately. Symptoms include fever, headache, body aches, nausea, and vomiting.
Coming up, fire season is underway in Canada, but it's not as bad as last summer. We'll talk about why that is and how we should be preparing for future wildfire seasons in the state with a climate scientist from the University of Michigan. Stay right there. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham, joined by this week in the co-hosting chair, Jerome Vaughn, WDET's news director. And Jerome, last summer we all experienced heavy smoke from the Canadian wildfires. We walked through this area. We constantly saw that smoky haze. We felt it in our lungs as we were walking around. But this summer we didn't feel it as much.
That's right. Thankfully, the air has been clear with some exceptions, and we're going to talk about that. It was only a year ago that Detroit was smothered in smoke for days. Last summer, the skies were hazy. Detroiters were encouraged to stay inside or maybe wear a mask if they went outside. That's because Canadian wildfire smoke was drifting south into the U.S. The smoke caused respiratory distress and sometimes even death for people who lived here and on the East Coast. Canadian wildfires have been a lot calmer this summer, but the issue of poor air quality in Detroit sometimes persists. Fires continue to burn on and off in both Canada and Michigan, and just last week there was a large mulch fire that broke out on Detroit's west side. That fire took days to extinguish. A warming climate means wildfires and their smoke are probably here to stay. The question is, how bad will they become? To discuss this, we have Richard Root on the line. He's a professor emeritus of climate and space science and engineering at the University of Michigan, and he recently wrote about what the future of Canadian wildfire smoke will mean for Michiganders. Professor Root, welcome back to the Metro.
Thank you for asking me.
So, by the end of last year, more than 6,000 Canadian fires had burned an area larger than the entire state of Michigan. This year, there appears to be a lot less damage in Canada. Why have those wildfires been smaller this year compared with last year?
Last year was extraordinary, and one of the aspects of last year is there were wildfires in the eastern part of Canada. The wildfire season in the western part of Canada this year is still quite bad, but last year there were enormous fires in Quebec, and those are the ones that had the direct impact on Detroit and Michigan and the whole sort of northeastern part of the U.S. in terms of smoke coming from there. And those fires occurred, one, because it was a very warm April, May in eastern Canada. That led to a lot of drying. The humidity was low, and then there was a set of dry lightning storms, which ignited a whole lot of fires very quickly, which proved to be, let's say, basically uncontrollable. Those conditions of the extraordinary dryness were not present this year.
Now, today here in Detroit, we're dealing with, high humidity, temperatures in the low to mid-90s. Those conditions can be widespread. One of the questions is, though, we deal with heat every year. We deal with climate change. How well are we going to be able to predict how bad wildfires in Canada will be from year to year?
So, the Canadians do have a fire prediction effort, as does the United States, and there is actually a lot of cooperation between the U.S. and Canada on fire and fire prediction. In terms of being able to predict the fires, one of the biggest indications would be the formation of drought and this deficit of humidity. And we have some ability to predict that seasonally in terms of whether or not those conditions are likely to persist. I think one of the things that is most important, though, is to be monitoring conditions. And when you see excessive drought start to occur, you know that the wildfire risk is going to go up. So I think going into a season, going into a summer, that you can be on high alert of whether or not fire is a big risk. It does get to a point, and one of the interesting things about fire and the big firestorms is that wind is always an important aspect of it. And it does get to a point when, it's exceedingly dry that it's not, if there's going to be a fire, it's, where the fire is going to be. So we have some predictive skill. The other thing I look at when thinking about climate change and things like this is what's happening in what we sometimes call the hip or the edge seasons like spring. Is if you're seeing drought in the spring, or if and we're seeing winters are getting warmer faster than summers, so that's changing the moisture sort of profile for the seasons. if you're seeing that in the spring, again, this is a yellow flag, I would say, to be highly alert for fire risk.
Now, we've had wildfires here in Michigan for eons going way back. But as you just mentioned, changing climate maybe making some difference in the fires we see here in Michigan. What sort of effect are you seeing?
So Michigan is interesting. What's going on in Michigan, in much of the Great Lakes Basin, especially the eastern part of the Great Lakes Basin, and the Northeast United States, is that we've been seeing record precipitation. We've been seeing record extreme precipitation. In Michigan, there's been a large occurrence of flooding, a few dams breaking, in the last 5 to 10 years. And if you look at fire in general in Michigan and what we would call the north, hardwood forests, there's actually been a decline of fire in the northern hardwood forests, and this is also a consequence of climate change. Climate change can make it wetter if there's a lot of moisture available, or it can make it drier. And so what we're seeing in Michigan right now, and I anticipate will probably be the conditions for the next, 2 to 3 decades, is it being very moist. That does not eliminate fire risk. When it is dry, the heat will make it get drier quicker. So fuels like grasses and shrubs become flammable. And of course, all that moisture has made them grow more. So there's this sort of, almost counter story of episodic fire risk associated, especially with, I think, igniting with grass fires and things like that. There's a little bit of an exception, I would say, in the Upper Peninsula, where this moistening, this wetting, is not occurring as much as it is in the rest of the state.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Richard Rood, Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan. We're talking about climate change and how that's altered fire season in Canada and Michigan. Tell me, you've written that there's not much we can do in Michigan to avoid the smoke and the air pollution from distant fires, but what can we do to mitigate the impact?
Well, so the fire, the smoke's going to come there. There's not much, when I say there's not much we can do, there's not much we can do to avoid the smoke being there. When I think about that, I immediately go to what the public health experts tell us, and especially for those with respiratory disease and other ailments that are going to be sensitive to that air pollution. So the basic idea of staying inside, and the idea also of improved filtration systems for HVAC systems and things like that. If I had to go outside, and I've had the experience, of course, like many people have, of having to be outside at times when there is heavy smoke, the masks, the particulate masks help a little bit, but it still can be quite difficult and quite oppressive to be outside when there's so much smoke you really can't even see the sun, at noontime during the day. So at some level that becomes an avoidance and staying indoors in filtered air. But once that smoke is in the region, we don't have big fans or anything. We don't have any ways to, let's say, evacuate that smoke from our region.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Emeritus Richard Rood. We appreciate having you on the Metro.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Coming up, former President Donald Trump was in Detroit yesterday. We'll talk with 2 reporters who covered his visit. You all stay right there. on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham, and I am joined in the co-hosting chair this week by WDET's news director, Jerome Vaughn. Jerome, so far it's a Tuesday. It's been okay?
As long as you're inside. Outside, not so much today.
Very, 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 very true. But there was someone who was, I guess outside, he was indoors, but he was here yesterday.
That's right. The president was here, and we're going to talk about that right now. Former President Donald Trump visited Detroit yesterday. He spoke to a gathering of the National Guard Association of the United States down at Huntington Place. The trip was Trump's second visit to Detroit this summer. In June, he spoke to parishioners at 180 Church on the city's northwest side. While both events for the Republican presidential candidate took place inside city limits, they had very different audiences. Joining us now to talk about former President Trump's event yesterday are Colin Jackson, reporter for the Michigan Public Radio Network, and WDET senior news editor Quinn Kleinfelter. Both of you, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
Hello.
So, Colin, let's start with you. You were at Huntington Place yesterday. Give us some background on who was there and why the president made a visit.
So this was an annual conference of the National Guard Association. This was being hosted in Detroit this year. Yesterday was the last day. Trump was there there was still some more business to take care of, but Trump was largely there. It kind of felt like a closing remarks almost type of speech. Leading up to it, the mood in the room, I guess, was just kind of standard. You know, it felt like a conference environment. They were doing a business meeting, as kind of tuning in and out as reporters do when they get ready for the main event. You kind of heard different stuff like TV show theme songs being played, advertising, I believe, maybe next year's conference in Wisconsin. So kind of just very mundane almost type things were happening. Leading up to Trump, he was introduced by Kid Rock. That's not something I was necessarily expecting. I believe we were told that there wasn't going to be much of a pre-setup for Trump's speech. And so I think that kind of started things going a little bit more. It didn't feel like a rally per se, but there was a sense of he had support within that room.
What was there much of a buzz going on in there ahead of time? Were people talking about Trump, or were they not? They're talking about their business ahead of time.
Really? I mean, a lot of what you saw leading up to it, basically till within an hour of Trump going on stage, they were just handling their business, you know, and people were coming in and out. It really felt like if you've ever been to a large conference with a lot of people in a room, there was presenters talking about different awards, honorariums, different things like that. It just felt like a regular conference in a lot of ways.
So as you watched the speech, what was your impression of what he was talking about?
Right off the bat, Trump came out swinging from a national security perspective. It was a very national security heavy speech. Early on, he promised to rid government of who he described as warmongers. He made several promises throughout the whole speech to avoid U.S. involvement in foreign conflict. He didn't say a lot new that we haven't heard him say in past moments. You know, he's talked about his claims that he's the only president to not further escalate us in a foreign involvement while his time in office in recent years. He talked about promises that he would continue avoiding conflict. He talked about his gripes with NATO and feeling like allied countries aren't contributing their fair share to NATO. He continued his attacks about the southern U.S. border and how he felt like the Biden administration, and therefore by extension Vice President Harris, his Democratic opponent for president, is letting the country down in those ways. You know, there's a lot of these continued gripes that we've heard before that he was repeating.
Now, one thing that was interesting was in the middle of his address, he took a break. He made an introduction of somebody. And that introduction made a little bit of news. Who was it and what was the news?
Yeah, exactly. This was relatively early on in the speech again. I was expecting just to see Trump and Trump alone. And at some point he decided to bring out a former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. This is someone who ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020. She had been at some point seen as kind of a rising figure within the Democratic Party. There's always been a little bit of controversy there about some of her own personal political beliefs and everything else, but she had been a member of the party, and she was endorsing President Trump for president. And she came out. This was a speech that they had given following a visit to Arlington National Cemetery. Trump was attending a wreath laying there earlier in the day for fallen service members who died during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan 3 years ago. Gabbard came out, and she had said, as someone who has served herself, she understands different trials and tribulations that service members go through, and she said that she understood that Trump was the right person, in her opinion, to represent service members and as the president.
So, Quinn, let me ask you, you listened to the speech as well that President Trump made. What was your impression about what the former president had to say?
Well, he mentioned to the crowd that he was going to try to keep it down, that it was kind of a, quote, a low-key crowd. But the fact is his tone, as Colin says, much of what he said was not different. But the tone is something that a lot of insiders say the Trump campaign wants to try to continue, that they would rather have him do more intimate venues and tone it down a bit from his usually raucous rallies, where he'll go off on a huge and usually very sharp-tongued tangent. He did that just a little bit during this particular speech, but he did kind of keep it much more quieter than a typical Trump rally. And that seems to be a theme that they want to have as they continue on through the rest of the campaign. I mean, it's a very short campaign now. And in many ways, what Trump and the Trump officials had planned has been completely upended by the Democrats having President Biden drop out and Vice President Kamala Harris now become the nominee. And they're still reacting to that in many ways. This is one of the things that they are trying to do, apparently, is to tone Trump down to an extent, which is a bit hard, number one, to tone him down, and number two, kind of runs counter to what many of his supporters are used to and seem to feed off of.
So, you know, you've been listening to President Trump, both of you, for months as he's come to Metro Detroit, as he's come to Michigan, as he's been campaigning. Colin, let me ask you, is his message having an impact on Detroiters these days? He's been here, this is the second time this summer.
I think that question is kind of almost, there's two different questions within that. One is he having an impact on the region? You know, when you go to his rallies, I still remember the first time I saw him in person. I believe it was back in February or March. It was still very cold out that day. He was at an airplane hangar in Oakland County, at the Oakland County airport. And that was a long line that stretched for what seemed like maybe a mile, you know, and people had waited there for hours to get inside. And some people at the end of it didn't get inside. And he was to what Quinn was talking about, he was rally Trump, you know, he was energetic. He had a bunch of speakers leading up to it. For hours, we were listening to that notorious campaign playlist that has like Macho Man or YMCA or like Andrew Lloyd Webber, like musical songs playing. And he was really amped up and he was going for it. And you talk to voters and they're excited, and it felt like just the energy was still there. And then as you continue, you know, you mentioned when he spoke to the church in Detroit, that was a very different type of crowd where it wasn't his bread and butter crowd. You know, these were, especially when it came down to like the black voters that were there, there was a lot of people that also came in that you got the vibe, maybe weren't necessarily Detroiters, but maybe from the region that just wanted to see Trump speak. That was the first time I'd ever seen him in a space with supporters where there were still open seats, you know? And within that, I had talked to some people after that were there. They were saying, oh, yeah, Trump did change my mind. You know, I came in not so sure. Or I came in thinking I used to vote for Democrats, but now I think I will give Republicans a chance or vote for Trump. So to that extent, yes, I think he is having a difference there. But he doesn't really need to make a big inroads within the city itself and win a lot of Detroiters to win the election. You know, I don't think anyone in this campaign is expecting to win the black vote writ large. You know, I think just peeling off enough black voters or peeling off enough of Southeast Michigan to take it from Harris, I think that's enough for them.
If you're joining us right now on the Metro, we're talking to Colin Jackson from the Michigan Public Radio Network and WDET's Quinn Kleinfelter about former President Trump's trip to Detroit yesterday. President Trump talked about issues of war and peace throughout his address yesterday.
When I'm back in the White House, we will expel the warmongers, the profiteers, and take over our government, and we will restore world peace. And it will be, again, peace through strength.
So, Quinn, how important is it, that message of peace through strength for Trump?
Well, it's something that he's tried to portray for a long time. It's something that he tried to draw a distinction between himself and the Biden administration, now the Biden-Harris administration, they will pointedly say. And it's something that he appeals to his base in many ways, that people were not doing some of the activities in terms of wars, the situation in Ukraine, et cetera, when he was in, because he will say that they were more or less scared of what he was going to do, that he was going to be strong and therefore actually had no wars started during his time period. The event that happened yesterday in Detroit was the anniversary of the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, which Trump himself had also planned to do. But it's something that Republicans, ever since it happened, it was a very shaky, chaotic withdrawal. And it was something that they thought was going to be a big campaign item that they were targeting Biden on. And it has faded to an extent, as things seem to do nowadays, in terms of the significance to the voting public, because there's these other issues that have come to the fore. Reproductive rights on the sides of the Democrats, the Republicans have pushed immigration and border issues repeatedly. But when you talk to people, as Colin goes out and does, and myself as well, I mean, most of the time, the issue that still it comes down to is the economy and people's pocketbooks and how badly they're hurting or not hurting. That's something the Harris campaign has hit and did during the convention last week and right before the start of the convention, when she put something that was a little bit light on specifics, but was still her economic plan. Trump is coming back and now and having to try to say that why, in fact, that is something that he would do better on. In fact, this week, the vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, J.D. Vance, is in talking about the economy. Trump himself is coming back on Thursday to discuss the economy. It's an issue that they think that they can win and that they can tie people to remembering how good, when you talk to some people, they'll say it was when Trump was in, that the prices were lower, things were better. People don't factor in what happened with the pandemic and what the Biden administration had to deal with at that time. And they also don't seem to factor in some of the things that Biden has done since that would be helping the economy, at least when you look at the data, but it hasn't really taken effect enough to make people feel it. And so that's part of what both Trump and Harris are going to be doing as we have this sprint now towards Election Day, as they're trying to make people realize that what you're feeling right now in your pocketbook is not necessarily how it's going to be by Election Day, and going on and trying to differentiate why one or the other would have more of an impact after Election Day.
Colin, we've just got about 30 seconds left. What do you expect from the GOP in the next 60 days?
I expect to see many more trips to Michigan. I expect to see, as Quinn was talking about, more of an effort to define Trump's policy and get beyond some of these kind of red meat issues that he likes to talk about at campaigns.
All right. Thanks so much. Colin Jackson is a reporter for the Michigan Public Radio Network and a friend of the Metro. And Quinn Kleinfelter is a senior news editor here at WDET. Thanks for joining us on the Metro today.
You're welcome.
Always happy to be here.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. That is just right. Colin Jackson, friend of the show. Welcome back, Colin.
Happy to be here, Tia.
Super excited about having you back on the show. Colin's always great to hear your insight as well. Quinn Kleinfeld, this is your first time on the Metro, so thank you for being here as well.
No, you're very welcome, Tia. I thought that I had done something to annoy you, which I know I have.
No.
So I didn't know if that was part of the
if
reason.
you wanted to come back on the show to talk about Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. Comic-Con's coming up, and you're going to be the guy. We're going to come to you and ask you all the things about Comic-Con. So.
There you go. And I'll be happy to talk about anything about Deadpool and Wolverine that is allowed on the air without getting our FCC license revoked.
Deal. Coming up, we'll discuss Black Philanthropy Month and what it means for a variety of organizations in Metro Detroit. You all stay right there. Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham, and this week we're joined by WDET's news director, Jerome Vaughn. And Jerome, this month is actually Black Philanthropy Month.
I am so excited to hear about this. It's such an important subject to talk about.
Indeed it is, especially in the city of Detroit, like a city like Detroit. Black Philanthropy Month is an annual global campaign to get people to donate to a variety of organizations run by people of African descent. Founded in 2011 by Black women, it's a way to celebrate and fund those who do transformative works within the Black community. In honor of Black Philanthropy Month, which is recognized annually in Detroit, the Soul of Philanthropy Michigan, or TSOP, will provide 10 microgrants to nonprofit organizations, block clubs throughout Metro Detroit and Detroit, including folks we've had on the Metro, Moja Debate Network, who recently returned from a trip to Ghana with the kids, which was so amazing to hear them. The favorite word they said was Ghana was lit, so that's how we're going to keep that. Ken Porter is the chief visionary and brand storyteller for PMG, as well one of the recipients of the microgrant. So Ken, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And Nikia Washington is a chair on the steering committee for TSOP Michigan. Nikia, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks so much.
Indeed. So Nikia, starting with you, TSOP Michigan is a group of volunteers throughout the city of Detroit. Who makes up that committee, and what position outside of TSOP do they hold? So what are some of the things that we're seeing from the committee? Because I was looking at some of those names, and I'm like, these are heavy hitters in the city. So how did you guys come together and get this started?
Absolutely. So our movement, if you will, started in 2021, really. So my co-chair is Colin Mays, a wonderful individual, really, who has connections across the state of Michigan. And so Colin and I were both interested in philanthropy from different lenses. A woman named Valeda Fullwood, who actually created the national exhibit, The Soul of Philanthropy. Yeah. She's a mentor of mine. Colin knew her from visiting several exhibits. We talked about bringing it to Detroit. Colin got us started. Valeda pulled me in, introduced me to Colin, and then we started to build and bring people along the way who really had a connection, interest, expertise in the philanthropic area, but really expanding the definition of philanthropy, not just thinking about big P philanthropy of funders and big names on buildings, but folks who are doing everyday things in their community that are benefiting and growing the community. So we just started to really tap people that we know, and people happen to say yes, which we were thankful for.
Okay, so for folks who don't know, because we didn't get into it, but the Soul of Philanthropy was a traveling exhibit that was headed across the country, and it was just highlighting giving back in the Black community and how the Black community is rooted in community and giving back to one another, supporting one another. So you built this out of that exhibit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we were the 33rd city. I think we were 31, 32, and 33 because we brought the exhibit to first Grand Rapids. That's where the whole movement started. Then we came to Ann Arbor, and then we ended at Detroit. Detroit was our big celebration, if you will, because in Detroit, not only did we bring the exhibit here, the Soul of Philanthropy reframed and exhibited, but we also created our own exhibit called Detroit Gives Black that was hosted. Both of them were hosted at Detroit Historical Museum last year. And in that Detroit Gives Black, we celebrated 90 Detroiters and organizations and helped to tell their story.
Nice. I love that. So speaking of the recipients and those who are celebrated, Ken, your company, your group is one of the recipients of of a microgrant this year. Give us a little background about PMG. What does PMG stand for, actually, so we won't just keep using acronyms? And what do you all do, especially as in the city of Detroit?
Yeah, well, actually, PMG stands for Porter Media Group. And we can go by PMG Agency, though. It's actually a lot easier to say. But PMG is essentially a storytelling agency that is intentionally rooted in the Black narrative. And so the work that we do is storytelling through a particular framework called asset framing, which is coined by my mentor and a good friend, Trevion Shorters of Be Me Community. Asset framing is a narrative model that defines Black people by our values, our aspirations, and our contributions before noticing or before, talking about our deficits or introducing those parts into the story. And it really values us for all of the things that we've done to benefit to society. And so that framework has really changed the way that I look at myself and the work that I do in the community. And we pivoted, a few years back from, typical event and brand marketing to storytelling on the Black narrative. And, one of the things that I learned through that training with Be Me Community was the fact that narratives matter more than facts. And so when I started researching what the consequences of false narratives in the Black community were, it really inspired me to want to take back control of our narrative and tell our own stories, because who tells a story does make a significant difference.
Yes. So, Ken, just kind of sticking there and talking a little bit about the work that you all are doing in the community, because I thought I knew PMG before from a different avenue, I guess, a different section of Detroit. So to see you all moving in this direction, you talked a little bit about owning and having ownership of telling those stories. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes in the city of Detroit, we hear from people in the community, arts community, music, whatever it may be, Detroit doesn't put on for Detroit, or Detroit doesn't have this going. How do you see PMG kind of being that space where Detroiters can go to have their story told and be really seen in front of their peers and their neighbors and their community in a big way?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I think about with that question is the person you mentioned a minute ago, Jerron Howard with Umoja Debate League. He wrote an impact statement from being one of the features of our film, and he shared how impactful it was to see his story being told by someone who actually cared a lot about the community. And so that is one way that Detroiters can see themselves in this line of work, by working with or partnering with PMG. I'm very, very passionate and very intentional about the way our stories are told. And I believe that the way that stories are told and the environment that they're curated in makes a really big difference on how people receive those narratives. And so, for example, this year we premiered our latest film called Soul in Harmony, which is about Black love and Black expression. And it premiered earlier this year downtown Detroit at the Gym Theater at the PMG Black Excellence Impact Dinner, which is a Black Excellence dinner that's really about the community. And so we brought out about 250 community leaders from both Detroit and across the nation to celebrate the features of our film who were from Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Harlem. Nice. And, we curated the environment so that when people receive the stories, they know that they were done with a very high level of excellence. So that's the way our stories are typically told. And I'm really intentional about just that excellence marker.
And, unfortunately, we are getting down to the end because these interviews move so fast, especially when they're really, really good. But Nikia, just jumping back to you, just everything that TSOP has been able to do with the microgrants. How have you all collected the funds to do this? And what can we expect, especially going into 2025?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and also ... ellipsis on the end of that. So we raised a lot of funding from funders across the state. So we had a ton of support through sponsorships last year. We had a little bit extra left over for this year, and we decided, why not? And that was our plan all along, to give back to communities. So we were able to do those microgrants. What's next? I think hit us up. Let us know what you want to see, and let's get to work.
Yes, I can't wait to continue on and follow up with you all a little bit later on in the year. Ken Porter is the Chief Visionary and Brand Storyteller for PMG, one of the recipients of those microgrants we were just talking about, as well. Nikia Washington as a chair on the steering committee for TSOP Michigan. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Tia.
This is The Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio. Your connection to news, music, and conversation. Jerome Vaughn and I will be back tomorrow.
Yes, we will, with excitement and purpose.